Hello and welcome on this presentation on LTI. LTI stands for Learning Tools Interoperability, and I'm going to try to cover the scope from what is LTI now and where it's going. Thus, from B to C, B stands for Basic Launch, and Basic Launch is really the core of LTI. And C stands for Caliper, and Caliper is one of the emerging services that is leveraging the LTI environment. So first of all, what is LTI? What problem does it try to solve? So it originates mostly from the learning management system world, so also known as LMS. An LMS system like Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas, Desire to Learn. It's basically a place where an instructor can go and find all the tools in one place to build the online presence of its of the course. So again, an LMS will provide a set of tools like course outline, ways to upload files, blogs, forums, discussion boards, quizzing, and a gradebook. All of that in a single convenient package. But sometimes when you're building your course, you're looking for something else. You need to use other tools. And this is where, let's say in this example here, I'm going to take the example where I'm trying to build a chemistry course. And I found somewhere else some kind of a simulation website that I would like to use in my course. And the one way I could do it is use the simple tools that you find in every learning management system that lets you just add a web link into your course outline. So you add a web link here, and when the instructor or student clicks on the web link, then you just go to this website. Obviously here, well, you probably have to log in again, and you probably need to navigate to some location or establish some kind of context because this is a dumb lunch. What would be really nice is if this link would convey important context information about the lunch you're doing, so that the experience here could be bootstrapped. So what kind of information would be nice to know to get on lunch? It would be nice to know who the user is, where the user is, and where is the idea here, in which learning context, in which course, and also what is the intent of the lunch. For example, what activity do you want to launch? So what LTI actually proposes to do is to provide the standardized way to express this information in a link lunch. So all of those become standardized parameters. Those parameters are passed now in a form-based fashion, so it's a post. And what really LTI provides is a common vocabulary to define this context. So we're going to have a look at the specifications themselves. So here I'm going to navigate to the IMS website, go to the standards, and go to LTI set. And you see there are many things, and we'll cover most of them later on. But we're going to go back to the very first iteration of the specification, which we're defining the basic lunch. And so we see here that they're defining the basic LTI lunch data, all this contextual information. They're defining the set, vocabulary, and how to define them. So for example, you're going to find a user ID, and that it uniquely identifies the user. You're going to find the roles, and not only the roles is the attribute is name, but also the enumeration. What kind of roles are possible? Instructors, learner, the names of the users, the context ID. Context here refers to the learning context. Therefore, usually you will find here is a course ID, course identifier. The type of course that is a course title. So you see a lot of information that are very relevant in a learning context when you're launching a learning tool. So if you go back, drawing here, so all of this information are quite useful, but they're only useful if they can be trusted. So you need to establish a trust between the two systems. So to do that, the spec relies on the idea of a shared secret. So both systems, the tool consumer here, where you want to use the tool, so it's called the tool consumer, and the tool provider need to communicate and exchange a shared secret, basically. So both systems are going to store on each of their side a secret. How this secret is exchanged is not part of the original specification. It's basically out of band administrators ringing the other one, but it remains known only to the administrators of both sides and is installed securely on the server databases. So basically each systems holds a secure database of secrets. And well, secrets, as a tool consumer, you might be using multiple tool providers, and multiple tool providers may be using different tool consumers. You need a way to associate, to identify a tool consumer and tool provider relationship as done using a key. So a consumer key. So now for a given key, one, you can have in a database a given secret. Okay. And the same one will be installed on the tool provider side. So now, when you have this link, it's a post. It contains the who, the where, the what. It will also now contain the key, basically identifying the originator of that request. And it will contain a signature. So what is a signature? A signature is basically taking this information that you find here and adding the secret. And the secret never goes on the wire. It remains here before to launch. And the secret is used in a recipe to blend all this information and the secret to give a single signature. For example, something like that. And the signature then is passed on the tool provider, and tool provider is going to use a key to find the secret. Then it's going to execute the same recipe and see if the signature matches. If the signature do not match, it means that the secret was not right, and so it cannot be trusted. But if the signatures match, then that means that the system that sends the request also had the same secret, so can be trusted. And so the recipe is very important, because if you get anything wrong in the build-up of this recipe, you might have a wrong signature, making you think that it's an untrusted link, even though it's actually trusted, but it just happens that one did not agree exactly on how to do the same recipe, and therefore you get different signature. So rather than trying to reinvent the right recipe, IMS is just reusing the OAuth 1.0 form signing process. So it's important to understand that IMS is not using OAuth in its entirety. It's just using the OAuth means of signing a payload, a form-based payload. So basically one could see that the LTI 1.0 is mostly a set of well-known parameters, vocabulary that defines the context, plus a way to secure it using an OAuth signature. And that's basically might be a simple way to see what is 1.0. So now let's put this in practice and actually add an actual LTI link in a real learning management system. And it just happens I have a little instance of Moodle running, so I'll use that, but it's going to be the same mechanics if you use Blackboard or Canvas or Desire to Learn or any other LMS. So the first thing is to find actually an app you would want to use. And so where do you find apps? One place to go is to go to the IMS Global website, which has a list of certified LTI apps. And they are in two buckets. On the left side here is the tool consumer, the one that are able to consume tools actually. And on the right side is all the tool providers, all the various kind of tools you can add into your learning management systems using LTI. And another way, and probably more convenient way to find apps, is to use the EduApps website here. And on the EduApps website, it's an LTI collection of apps, and you can actually even, I think on the Canvas LMS, directly auto-installs those. But anyway, so here we're gonna look for ChemVantage, which happen to be a free chemistry-based tool that's LTI compliant. So I registered with that, and I actually got from them key and secret, which are here, and actually a launch URL. So let's actually put that in place into my course. So I would go into my course, and I'm going to say I'm going to add an activity. In that case, it's an external tool, which actually stands for LTI, and I'm going to add one. Close that here, and I'm going to give it activity name ChemVantage assessment. Right, so I need the launch URL. But I also need to enter the key and secret, and those are found into the more section. So for that, I need to put a key. And the secret. All right. And that's it. So we haven't talked about privacy yet, and you see you can pass a lot of parameters. And typically, when you install a tool into your learning management system, you can your learning management system will ask you what kind of data are you okay to send to the external tool. And typically here it's okay to send a name and email address. We can actually, if you uncheck those, then those would not be included into the LTI launch, and on the LTI launch you would only find the user ID, but no way to associate it to an actual user. So we'll get back to the grades a little bit later. So we're gonna save this, and we'll return to course. So I was saying LTI gives you the context of the launch, let's say the who, the where, and the what. But I've not been very precise on the what. What do we launch when we click on that? And that's not been very clear, because as you see here, the URL is river and specific. You just go to ChemVantage. But I said it was an assessment. So how does the binding occur? And when we see here, actually, when we launch, actually it's asking me, okay, this is a new link. I've never seen that link before. So how do you want, as an instructor, to set it up? And I'm going to say, for example, it's going to be a quiz. Pick one here randomly. Okay, and now by doing that, I've actually in ChemVantage I've bound the actual link to this assignment, and this is done. So now if I go back to the course, and actually I'm gonna open up the network tab here, network, and try to narrow it a little bit so it can be seen. I'm gonna do the launch, and here we see that it's a post, so that's the LTI launch to the ChemVantage, and let's see what's in that post actually. So we'll find here as part of the parameters all the LTI parameters, so the link ID, and the link ID here is really so the thing that's basically binding this link to this assessment on ChemVantage side, and a few information like the description, as the user ID, the roles of that user, that I'm currently an instructor. Because I'm an instructor, then I can customize the quiz here because it's instructor only, and a few things like my name. So you see, I was automatically signed into that tool, right? So that's kind of it here for the example. Now I'm going to get back a little bit more on this idea of resource link ID and the what. A resource link ID is a unique identifier for a given link. So that means each and every link inside a tool consumer have a distinct link ID. Therefore, when I'm creating this new link here, then the LMS is going to give it, for example, a new identifier. Let's say, for example, this is going to be 71. So the first time I do launch, I do execute that link here, the resource link ID will be 71, and the tool provider will see that it's never seen that link before. And because I'm launching as an instructor, it will provide me with a way to bind 71 with something. So in that case, I would say 71, I'm going to pick a quiz. And from that point on, from a tool provider standpoint, every time you see the link ID coming up 71, you say, okay, 71 maps to that quiz, therefore I could directly jump to that quiz. So that's the way you actually associate a link to a very specific activity inside the tool provider. But there are quite a few shortcomings with that approach. The main shortcoming is that, first of all, you need to initialize the link as an instructor. Therefore, if a student exercises the link before you, then you will have nowhere to go because the link has not been initialized yet. But more importantly, the issue is that what happens when you start copying that course. Because if you copy the course here, if I make a copy of that course for the next semester, then I'm actually creating a new link, and therefore that link will have a new ID. So it could be like, I don't know, 76. And now when I exercise 76, and I go there, then again it's going to be unbounded. So when I copy a course that has LTI links, with this method I would have to go and reinitialize each and every link one after another. So there is the idea, some kind of guidelines that are being proposed to pass on launch a source resource link ID. So in which case we could say that the resource link ID, the 76 would be actually coming up from 71. But those are those limitations also, because it implies 71 is still actually a viable link. It's not been erased. And also it doesn't work if you try to make a course package and try to export it to another learning management system, because 71, 76 is very, those numbers are very relevant to that integration and they're not very portable. What we would really want is actually to set up parameters on the link when you create the link, and those parameters would say, when you create the link, you would say this link actually goes to quiz, and it says it's going to be quiz A. It says this link I would like it to go to quiz A. And actually LTI lets you enter parameters, and they're called custom parameters, and we can see it as an example. So even though Vantage doesn't use that, I can just illustrate the point here how that would work. So I would go here, and then in show more I would say, so, okay, see, I can add custom parameters, and now I could say, for example, I could say activity equal quiz A, and I would save that. And now when I relaunch it, we could see it here, params, and you see custom underscore activity. So by specification, any additional parameters, in order not to collide with core specification parameters, are always prefixed with custom underscore. So I have entered activity quiz A, and now this is passed to tool provider as custom underscore activity quiz A. And you see here, by doing this extra work when I was setting up the link, then I pass enough context so that the activity cannot automatically start. I don't need to do a late binding. And also this has the advantage that now if I do a course extract, a course export, and part of the export of the link definition will be, those parameters will be included in this export. So when I re-import in another course somewhere else in another learning management system, it will still say that it has these parameters of quiz A. And the same when if I copy the course, this will transfer. So really this is the preferred way to use custom parameters. But of course it's a bit less convenient, because now you can just put a link. You have actually to add these parameters into the interface. So we see here in the specification how you pass a key value. So really, again, it's prefixed by custom underscore. So you see you can pass statics values, but it's also a very important thing moving forward with the LTI specification is actually you can pass what is called substitution parameters. So you see they start with a little $. And what they mean is that now here, this you would like it to be resolved by the tool consumer before to launch to the tool provider. So what this string says, it says, okay, give me the course section, time frame begins. So that's going to give you the start of the course, and before the launch, this is resolved by the tool consumer, and actually the actual value is put as a parameter. So that's a very important mechanics, and so it taps into the substitution parameter, and the substitution parameter vocabulary is actually defined as part of the specification, and you can see it here, all the different kind of vocabulary that's possible. But the trick here is that it's not because it's defined that it's supported by the tool consumer, and more often than not, those would not be supported outside of the most obvious ones. But the substitution parameters, as they become more and more important, their support is getting wider and wider. And actually LTI2 really relies on the substitution parameters, and it's a more flexible way to inject yourself information that's relevant to the context of your launch, rather than having a very long fixed set of parameters. This way, when you set up your link, you can have custom parameters with custom substitution values that are resolved at launch time. So one last thing on LTI integration setup. So you see, as an instructor, I can add my own LTI links, but often this is actually done at the administration level, where the administrator of the LMS will actually set up a trust relationship with the tool providers that can then be reused for all the courses inside the LMS. So we're going to see an example here. Now, rather than logging in as an instructor, I'm going to log in as an administrator of the LMS. And here I find LTI. So I can add an external tool configuration. And I'm going to use the same information I used before. And now I'm going to save the changes. And by doing that, I've created a new tool that's globally accessible to all courses. So let's log out and log back in as an instructor. And now here I'm gonna add. Now here I'm going to turn edit on, and I'm going to add an activity resource. And you see here I can add an external tool again. And you see and I can give it my name, KMVantage admin tool. I can put the URL. So you see here, by using the domain name, Moodle was able to realize that this is actually a tool configuration that's already exists. So it doesn't. I don't have to enter again so I don't have to enter again the shared secret and password. It's all set up already, so I can just save and return to the course now. And now the link is here, and let's see if it works. I see it works. It's basically the same thing. I need to associate to an activity of some kind. And yep. So again, as an admin, I can set up a tool. And when I create a link, the LMS is going to detect, based on the domain, on the path to the tool, it's going to detect that there is already an existing configuration. Therefore, the trust has already been established, and it can do an LTI launch to that domain. So the instructor don't have to worry about getting the proper credentials to launch into the tool. This can be set up at the LMS level. So now what we've seen here is a way to actually launch from the learning management system into the tool provider. So you're there in that tool. But the issue with that tool is that you don't really know what's happening out there. It's really a black box. Once you've launched, so your student is in this tool provider world, is doing things, but as a tool consumer, you don't know what's happening. You just know that you did launch. So LTI 1.1 came up with a first answer to that, because maybe the very first thing you would want to get out of that box is actually some grades, some outcomes. So LTI 1.1 came up with basic outcome. So with basic outcome service, it's now possible for the tool provider to return a grade to the tool consumer. So does that work? The first thing you need to do actually is when you set up your link, you need to declare that your link is actually able to support a grade. And as we'll see, that usually means that suddenly your link is also going to have a representation into your tool consumer gradebook, in your course gradebook. So usually, you have your gradebook, and suddenly then you have you're going to have a new column for your link. So now, when you launch, there are two new parameters that are added to the launch. So those parameters are result, sourced ID, and outcome service URL. So what are those? So the result source ID is identifying a recipient created in the tool consumer to receive the result of this interaction from this user with this link. Usually you could represent that as this cell in the gradebook, for example, which is a relationship between a link and a user, but it doesn't really have to be a cell in the gradebook. It's really capturing the interaction of that user with this link. So you're going to pass an identifier for this relationship, but then now as a tool provider, you need a way to post back the value, and this is where on every launch we're passing the URL. So you see it's important here that the tool provider doesn't need to have a prior knowledge of the outcome service URL. This outcome service URL is passed on every single launch. And that's a pattern that we're going to find as we move forward on other LTI services, is that we tend to avoid prior knowledge of service URLs. So service URLs are passed on launch. So now, as tool provider, I have a location to identify an outcome container in the tool consumer side, and I have a URL to post it back. So the only thing I need to know is that what exactly is the format I need to put, I need to send on this URL. And this basic outcome service was done some time ago, and it's still using an XML construct. And actually it's using commands in XML, and you have 3 kinds of commands you can do. So those commands are you can replace a result, you can delete a result, and you can also read a result. So replace a result is the most important command here, because that's the command you're going to use to post a grade from the tool provider to the tool consumer. And delete result is where you want to remove a prior result. Usually, for example, a submission is reset, or for some reason the user has to start again. So basically you're going to notify the tool consumers and the result has to be cleared. And cleared doesn't mean that it's actually physically deleted on the tool consumer side, maybe stay in the history or something, but that is as a tool provider, it's a way to communicate a reset of a grade. And then read result is a bit of an odd one, and so I would put it a bit in a, maybe more in a shaded, not that it's less supported, but it has a bit of an odd value, because as a tool provider you're there to return a grade. You're not there to consume grades in the tool consumer side. So really what's expected is that with read result is that you would read what you've replaced. In some tool consumer sites that might give you some insight into a gradebook cell, but some of our gradebooks are actually going to make sure that any changes made by the instructor inside the gradebook are not visible to the tool provider. So really in that case what you would see anyway is what you posted. So really the key use case here is replace result and delete result. So now we're gonna just be looking at the document, at the actual example in the specification, but one last thing is that the grades that are being exchanged are normalized. And so what does it mean by normalized? That means the values are between 0 and 1. So it's a bit like a percentage value. There are never actual points being exchanged. So here, for example, I can send a 0.8, post a 0.8, or an 80%, basically. And now, if my gradebook is point-based, then the scaling would have to be done on the gradebook side. So for example, it's out of 10. If in my gradebook I set this link out of 10 points, then this would actually be in here. Actually, I would put in here there would be an 8, basically. So let's have a look at the actual specification. So basic outcome service was defined with 1.1, and actually 1.1 is really 1.0 plus basic outcome mostly. And so we see it here in the basic outcome section. We have the 3 commands we talked about: replace, read, and delete. And let's have a look. So you see here you have the format for the XML, but really in the XML you're gonna find the command. So here it's, for example, the replace result. You're gonna find the source ID, which is really the identifier of the result container on the tool consumer side, the ID to receive the grade, and the value, again a normalized value. So let's see how we actually use it by actually modifying the previous link we've created to accept grades. So it's usually very easy. You have a setting somewhere into that, let's say that you can want to capture grades, and in that case here it's found here, accept grades from the tool. And so when this is done, when you checked it in, if you go to the grades or in your grade book, then you're gonna find columns created for those resource links. And now if I go as a student, here for example, and let's go back here, let me clear that, and I'm gonna do the lunch here as a student. And let's see, let's locate the actual LTI lunch, which is I think right here. And let's see the parameters that's been passed on lunch. And now this is a typical LTI parameters, but what you find out, the two new ones we discussed before, is the actual URL for where you're going to post grades back, and the ID that identifies this interaction. That means this activity and this user interacting with this activity. And it's an opaque identifier. Here Moodle choose to use some kind of JSON representation, but really it can just be just a number or something. It's totally opaque and it's just communicated back to the basic outcome service to identify a given result. So now on the tool consumer, we have a new endpoint here, the basic outcome service endpoint. And it's very important to secure it because it's open on the web and we don't want just anybody to basically be able to post grades. So we need to secure this endpoint and make sure that this request we are seeing is actually coming from the tool provider. So we are going to leverage shared secret again, and we are also going to leverage OAuth. But there is one issue, is that OAuth, the original OAuth was signature process is meant to sign form-based request. In our context here, we no more a form, we have actually an XML payload. So how do we solve that? Well, we are using an extension to the OAuth signature process called OAuth body hash. So how does it work? Well, OAuth body hash is actually a two-step process. The first thing that happens in an OAuth body hash is actually going to compute a hash of the body. So basically, we run this body through a hashing function, and this hashing function is actually defined in the OAuth header, and we get a value. That value, actually, we are going now to put it into the OAuth authorization header. And it's actually that's the value here. So this value is actually the hashing of the body. And now this authorization header in itself is signed using the shared secret. And so this is what is sent, and then the tool consumer receives the request, it actually does the reverse operation. So the first thing it's going to do is verify that this authorization header is actually properly signed. So it's going to use verify the signature with this shared secret and verify that this is a valid OAuth request. Now, if this is a valid OAuth request, that's fine, but you still need to verify that the body has not been modified in the meantime. That means the header has been reused in another kind of body. So to do that, it's going to compute the hash of the body and verify that the hash of the body is actually matching the one that was passed into the signed authorization header. And if it does, then it guarantees that this request has not been modified. So this mechanics here, again, is going to be found across all LTI services. So one last thing on that is that yes, with OAuth body hash, you know that the request, the payload, is coming from the tool provider, and therefore can be trusted to a certain extent. But additional business logic security must still apply. So for example, here we have a result that we want to modify. Then something that a tool consumer is probably going to do is going to use the key that was in the request and verify that the result that needs to be modified is actually based for a link that is owned by that tool provider. So that this way, one cannot use a relationship here between a tool provider and tool consumer to actually modify data that is not owned by this relationship. So that's additional security and restrictions that must be applied once the payload has been verified. Again, now using on the key and see what kind of resources are attached to the key. So a standard is only a standard if it's actually been used out there, if you can rely on it for interoperability. And that's the nice thing with LTI 1.0 and LTI 1.1. So what I try to represent here is this idea of adoption horizon. So when the standards have reached so much of a critical mass that it can be used, and it's therefore because it's being used, it's used even more. So LTI 1.0 and LTI 1.1 have reached that level. I would put them well within this horizon of adoption. Yeah, so I would put them right there, and they would be close one with another because really most of the time when a tool implements 1.0, it does also implement 1.1. So that's basically on the here on the adoption well within the ring. So now we're going to be looking in the second part of this presentation. We're going to be looking at basically what's laying outside, what's coming up with LTI, and try to give an idea of where they stand and how close they are from crossing that horizon. So let's start. So the first addition I'm going to cover is a new message type called Content Item Selection Request. It was added early this year, February 2015, and is still in public draft at the time of this recording. So what is it about? Now with the Content Item Selection Request, the interaction is quite different. When you launch into the tool provider, you launch into the tool provider to pick up or build a resource that you're going to add back to the tool consumer. So, for example, let's take the simple case where on the tool providers you could have, for example, a bunch of videos, right? So it could be like kind of a videos repository, and you can have a bunch of videos here, and you would want to add some of those directly into your course. So you would launch into the tool provider, so still an LTI launch, but this LTI launch would have now another message type. The message type would not be basic launch, it would be Content Item Selection Request, and it indicates to the tool provider that now you want to either build or pick a resource depending on what the tool provider offers. So in this specific case, for the video use case, I can just say, okay, I want to pick this one, and when I say submit, then now on the launch there is also return URL that's passed, and when I press submit, I'm actually returning back to the tool consumer UI using the return URL. But this return URL is a post, and in that post I include a content item description, which is actually a JSON string that describes the item I intend to return, and the specification defines the format of the content item. So for example, for video it would define how you pass the URL, the width, height, stuff like that. And so now on the tool consumer side, it's parsing the content item value, and basically just could add directly a new video link. So that's for simple resources like video, but where it becomes very valuable is that you can use this interaction to return not images or videos or documents to upload, but you can also return information to create a new LTI link. And if you remember from early on when I was explaining how you set up a resource link, I said the best thing to do on a resource link is actually to put custom parameters. But those custom parameters, as you remember, the UI to create an LTI link is a little bit awkward. How do you know the custom parameters? How do you know which value to put in there? Well, with the content item selection request, it provides now an alternate way to actually add LTI links into the tool consumer, so that you don't have to use the add external link interface. So how would that work? Well, you would go into your tool consumer and you would have a new maybe add Cloud Lab simulation, and when you click on that, it would just go back to here to Cloud Lab. It would be a content item selection request, but now you would indicate that you want to create an LTI link. And here, maybe again, it's going to be a picker of the different kind of simulation that are around. Or it could actually be even create a new one. It doesn't really matter. But at the end of this process, there is a simulation that you're happy with, that you want to add a link to. So when you press submit now, returns back here, and the content item that's posted back now contains the custom parameters. And its custom parameters might be, for example, the simulation ID. And now a new link can be created, so it would be another activity, and the activity would be like some name. And when you click on it now, and it's going to be a basic lunch, and then this basic lunch will contain these custom parameters. So you see here with the content item selection request, we've replaced the awkward way of setting up custom parameters with a way with a user-friendly interface that under the cover passes the custom parameters so that the link can be properly provisioned on the tool consumer side. And actually I have a demonstration of that flow in our own product called MindTap. So we've used that. This is a QA servers that we're using here, and we're using LTI in MindTap. MindTap is a courseware platform from Cengage, and we're using MindTap LTI to integrate various learning tools into the course. And for those, we don't want the instructor to ever have to enter custom parameters. We always want them to use user-friendly provisioning interface. And so, for example, here I'm gonna add an activity from one of our LTI providers called UCU, which are video quizzing. And when we launch here, we're actually launching directly to UCU now through an LTI link. But as you can see here, the message type now is no more a basic lunch request, it's a content item selection request. And here in this interface, it's a picker interface, and I can pick any of those activities. And when I'm done, I can just continue, and continue is going to post back on the return URL. And you see here there is a return URL. It's going to post back all the information needed to provide to create this link. So it's post back to the return URL, and you see it as the content items, which is encoded here. And okay, so this is the final step within MindTap now to basically add the activity. As you can see, that's a link now, and if I click now on this one, now that's going to be a plain basic lunch to UCU. So we see now that's a post, and it's a basic lunch message type. Now it's a basic lunch, and we'll have here the custom parameters, which are important, custom ref ID here, which is the identifier of this activity. So that's the one that allows directly to jump, when I click on this LTI link, to directly jump to this activity. So that's a content item selection request. Again, the very nice, interesting way to add links and other kind of resources into a tool consumer. So back on the horizon view, content item request has a lot of potential, but it's fairly new. So I would put it here, I think it has a great future ahead. It solves a lot of use cases, from, again, the LTI links addition to the idea of repositories and grabbing things from an external repository back to the tool consumer. So we see that the LTI environment is getting richer and richer as the specification grows. And now, as a tool provider, the kind of interaction I can have with the tool consumer can greatly vary based on the capabilities of a tool consumer. And really, capabilities here is a key word. What is this tool consumer supporting? So, for example, a tool consumer can support different kind of services. Also, what kind of UI interaction, UI flow, what kind of messages can be sent. Of course, basic lunch request is always going to be there, but does it support content item selection request, the one we've just covered? And there are other interactions that will be added to the specification as it grows. And also, we've mentioned the idea of the substitution parameters. So you would want to use substitution parameters as part of your lunch parameters, but which one can you use? Can you use context type? Can you use user ID? So but now we would what a tool provider would like to know is some kind of a definition of what are the capabilities of a tool consumer to know what it can rely on. And this is what has been introduced with the tool consumer profile. Now, a tool consumer profile is mostly going to be around the capabilities of the tool consumer. And what capabilities? Mostly capabilities in terms of messages. So that part here. In terms of services here. And in terms of substitution parameters. Services, substitution parameters. The tool consumer profile was introduced with LTI 2.0 and is also being used in LTI 1.2. So basically what LTI 1.2, one of the main addition to LTI 1.1 is LTI 1.2 allows on launch to be passed the tool consumer profile URL. So the tool consumer profile URL would be passed on launch here. So basically now when I'm launching from my tool consumer a basic launch request, I'm being passed the tool consumer profile URL. Therefore, I can use this URL to query the tool consumer, to query back, and get its list of capabilities through a tool consumer profile. And the tool consumer profile is a JSON representation, and it's defined in the specification. So we are looking here at the 1.2 specification, and you see one of the big additions. Actually, the main addition is the tool consumer profile here. And we go to it and we see an example. So again, the JSON payload, and we get back to here at this add context. It's a JSON-LD context, but before that, just having a quick glance at it, we see a description of the tool consumer. So what kind of product that is, so what kind of learning management system, for example, that is, a product definition, and the owner of the service institution that owns the deployment. So it's a lot of information about the tool consumer itself, but really what matters is the capabilities offered. And you see this one is a very simple one where it just supports basic launch. And here is an example of a service offered. It would give you the identifier of the service and mostly the endpoint under which to call on that service and the format expected for that service, which is you see here we're using media type. So it's a JSON payload, but it's been defined under media type. And the only operation supported on this endpoint is a get, so you can get that. So that's the definition. Of course, much more information in the specifications themselves. But that's the idea. With the tool consumer profile, you can get a picture of the capabilities of a tool consumer, and therefore know if you can call a service or expect some kind of interaction to be triggered from that tool consumer. But really, the tool consumer profile was introduced with version 2 of the specification, which are around automatic registration. So we see here, when we create an LTI link or provision an LTI provider into a tool consumer, now there is a lot of options. So not only we have services that we offer as a tool consumer, but also the tool provider might expect to use some of the services, and some you might actually not use, not offer. So there is some kind of a setup, manual setup, that it says, compared to what I have to offer, what do you want? What do you want to use? The same goes for substitution parameters, and obviously a key element A key element is a shared secret, right? You need to agree on setting up the shared secret. So all of that accounts for a fair bit of setup. And what would be really nice is that you have more like a plug-and-play experience where it says, I want to use your tool provider. Okay, I'm going to easily register it into my system using just a single endpoint. And that's basically the idea with the registration process behind LTI 2.0. And for example, if you go back to ChemVantage, and I'm not going to be able to show you a demo of that because I don't have an LMS right now that support to do the demonstration. But you see here as a tool provider, I'm going ever to tell you, you can do this manual setup, give me your email address and a consumer key, I'm going to return you a secret, and you'll provision it yourself. Or, just plug that into your learning management system that's 2.0 compatible, and it will do the rest for you. So let's see how this dance works. So you got this URL from your tool provider, and your tool consumer, you would just go into this tool provisioning interface, and you could enter something like, it would have something like enter registration URL. Right, so something like that. Okay, and so you would have a box to put it in there. So now you will enter your URL, something, and this is going to initiate a new message type, a registration request message type. So you see it's not a basic launch request, it's a registration request. And so registration request. And the tool proxy registration request is actually a few different parameters that are used for the registration process that are passed on launch. So those parameters are registration key, registration password, and tool consumer profile. So registration key and registration password are same thing as a key secret we've seen before, but it's just used for the time of this registration. So it's a non-permanent key and password you can use to secure some of the interaction, and those are going to not be reused. They can only be used once for one registration, and they're supposed to expire under a short amount of time, like an hour. So those are passed to the tool provider, and now the tool provider can display some kind of UI. But the first thing actually the tool provider is going to do is use the tool consumer profile URL to actually query here this tool consumer profile service we've seen before. So it's going to issue a GET request to get the tool consumer profile. So now with the tool consumer profile, the tool provider is able to see to have a good representation of the capabilities of the tool consumer, and see what kind of its own capabilities, its own services and interaction it can expose to the tool consumer. So it's going to build what we call a tool proxy. It's kind of an odd name, but a tool proxy is a deployment, if you want, of this tool provider inside this tool consumer based on the capabilities of the tool consumer. So that's a tool proxy. That's the deployment of this tool provider in this tool consumer. And so a tool proxy will contain mostly resource handler. So a resource handler, you could see it as an interaction in the system. So for example, here this tool provider might have two different kind of interaction. It could be that it has assignment. It also has some kind of a media repository. So we would like to expose actually two different set of LTI launches to either access the assignment part or the media part. So in that case, it could register two resource handlers, and each of these resource handlers would have a different message endpoint. And so we'd have a message in there. And for a given message, it will say, oh, for this message, I need those capabilities to be enabled. So for example, I need to be able to have basic outcome support, because this is the first one is going to be an assignment resource. So I want basic outcome, and the other one, maybe for the second one, you're going to say I want the content item selection request, because I want to be able for you to go and launch and launch into my repository of media, video files or something. So you define here resource handlers, endpoints for the UI interaction, and capabilities you want to be exposed for each one of those handlers. And so you build a proxy, and now part of the tool consumer profile, in the service section, you have a tool proxy registration service. So tool proxy registration service, and this is the endpoint that the tool provider is going to post the tool proxy to. So it's now going to post this tool proxy, which is a JSON document, to the tool proxy registration service. And this request here now is going to be signed using the key and password we've seen here, using the same mechanics as the OAuth body hash we've seen before. And now by doing that, this password should basically be invalidated. You cannot post. It should not be able to be reused to post another tool proxy. As a response of posting this tool proxy, if it's a success, you get an ID for this proxy here. And now when you're done with that, it's time now on the UI now to use the return URL, which was passed here also on lunch, to return the user back into the tool consumer. And when you return, you pass it the ID of the tool proxy you've registered, of the tool proxy. And now when you land back into the tool consumer, you can actually see the UI on the tool provider side that's going to load probably to the user a summary of the tool proxy based on the ID he got. So it says, okay, this tool proxy has actually it's exposing two new kind of resources in the system. It's exposing an assignment resources. It's exposing a media resources, and this assignment resources actually would like to get access to to grades, to basic outcome, to post grades. You want also to have some information about the user, and this one is actually just want a content item selection request, so nothing special about it. Sorry, it doesn't write very well. Anyway, and so you see the summary, and until the user has clicked OK, the tool proxy is not active. So it's not posting the tool proxy here, is not making it active. It's only when the user is back on the tool consumer side, sees a summary of it, that he can acknowledge it. And the acknowledgement can happen right away, can happen maybe 1 week after, depending maybe on some other kind of conversation or review within the institution or whatever. But at some point, if all goes well, then the tool proxy is activated. And when it becomes activated, then those resource handlers becomes available to create new instance of them. So you can create a new instance of an assignment. You can use the content item selection request to go into the tool provider to pick up resources. And also an important element that I've not put here just yet is that the tool proxy, being the deployment of a tool provider inside the tool consumer, also contains a shared secret and the consumer key. So now when this is validated, then the secret is added here to the database. The key secret is added to the database. So the tool is deployed, is fully deployed at the end. So you see here with the idea of registration, a tool consumer profile, and the definition of a tool proxy as a deployment of a tool provider within a given tool consumer. The idea is to try to use the registration flow to get as close as possible to a plug-and-play deployment, where most of the underlying mechanics are hidden and behind UI flows, where users select a few options and validate another, but actually is not aware of having to enter shared secret and consumer key. All of those are hidden in the process. So here we can have an example of a resource handler taken from the specification, and we see where it identifies the resource type, it's a unique name, and a human readable description, and it says that it wants one message type, one kind of interaction, which is basic lunch, and this is a path to the basic lunch, so where to launch when you actually execute that launch from the tool consumer. And now when you launch, it also expects some kind of parameters, and those parameters are those name fixed. And here it says it wants discipline to always be chemistry, but here wants the name of a person to be given as person.name.given, and this is back to the capabilities as a substitution parameters. And same thing for result ID. So result ID is the identifier for where to put a grade back, because we want actually the capability to auto-create a result, a place to receive a grade when this launch happens. So we have a place to report a grade. It's going back to the same concept as basic outcome, basically. So where does it stand in terms of adoption? I would put it very close to the edge. It's been around for quite some time, but now major platforms are getting to actually doing the extra work to support it. And it's an important building step towards a richer LTI environment, because now as we add new services, as we add new message types, it's become more and more important to streamline the registrations and the discovery process. Because again, as we widen the scope of LTI, we cannot expect every tool consumer to support the full spectrum. Now, tool provider wanted to use the full spectrum, so it's become very important to have this discovery phase. And a bit like when you install a mobile app onto your phone, it's going to look at the capabilities of your phone and what it wants, and it's going to ask you if it's okay to use those services, and then it's going to be active. Then this is the same kind of idea here to auto-register a tool inside a tool consumer platform. So let's review some of those guiding principles. So the first one I would say that comes to mind is URLs. Are no more URLs to services, but they're a URL to resources. So it's really a resource orientation of the API. And so what is meant by that? So I can use the example of the basic outcome we've seen before. So in the basic outcome, in every launch, you were getting the outcome service URL. And this URL was taking XML commands. And in the XML, you needed to put the actual ID that you wanted to modify. And actually, this was because this was passed to you as a second parameter as a result ID. So you see here the URL is really the URL of a service that takes XML commands, and the actual data you want to modify is another parameter. It's the ID. Well, a resource orientation URLs means that you actually blend those two together. And now what you get instead is a result URL. So you get an addressable location for this result. And now you can go on this result URL and directly interact with it using HTTP verbs rather than using XML commands. So you can say, give me the current grade. So it's going to be a get on this URL. No need to change any parameter or do anything. This URL is totally opaque. And you can actually put a new value as this URL if you want to change a grade, or you can maybe even clear a grade by calling delete on this endpoint. So traditionally, you do a get to get the current value, a post to create a new resource, a put to modify one, and a delete. That's kind of the traditional way to address that. And so, I don't know if you remember, but in the tool consumer profile, we see get, post, put, and delete. So in the tool consumer profile, not only you're going to indicate that you expose locators to a given set of resource, but you're also going to say what kind of actions you would allow tool providers to do on those resources. And in the tool proxy, the tool provider would require all those verbs, or maybe just a subset. So maybe as a tool provider, you're only interested in doing a get. So in which case you say that for this resource, I'm only requesting to do get. That would be my tool proxy contract. So the third principle actually is going to be substitution parameters. And what I mean here is that the URLs you're going to use, it's not required that you have prior knowledge of those, or that you go look at the tool consumer profile and look what would be a template for that and try to find your way to put stuff into a URL template. No, URLs are passed on every launch fully resolved. So they're completely opaque. And that's a great mechanics of LTI, because LTI is not just a set of services, but everything is triggered through that launch. So now, let's say there is a new service around, and you care to use that service. So when you're going to declare a link, you're going to say this link wants to have access to the service. So you're going to say, I'm going to have a new parameter, which is service URL. And you're going to say, okay, and what is going to be this value? This value is going to be, I don't know, like the service .url. And what happens at runtime, as you see here, it has a $sign. At runtime, the tool consumer is going to replace the service URL with the actual URL, which is going to be resolved based on the current context, on the current user, and it's going to be directly actionable by the tool provider. No prior knowledge of the URL, and URL template are not required. So URLs can be totally opaque. So now, those URLs are resources, so it becomes very important to understand what those resources are, and it's no more enough to know that they are JSON something. So media types become very important. So that's going to be the fourth principle here I would put here. You need to know the media type, and more importantly, you need to take part into content negotiation. To leverage the idea of content negotiation, which is part of the HTTP protocol. So to illustrate that, let's give an example. So let's say you have a service that represents, gives you access to some kind of resource, and it can either give you a flat representation of the resource, like a list, or it can give you a tree, a nested representation of the same resource. So it's two different representations. Depending on the use case, you might prefer the flat list, or in another case, you might prefer a tree representation. All of those would be done in JSON. So now you're going to define two media types. You're going to find my flat media type, and it's going to still be a JSON. That's going to be your first media type, and you're going to have the same one. It's like going to be my tree representation plus JSON. Those are the two media types that the same resource can serve now. So it becomes important when you go around, you say which representation do you want to get. And actually, what we would rather not do is put a parameter, a query parameter, says I want the version flat or version 3. Actually, there is a better mechanics than that, is to say what you accept. And in the HTTP header going out, you will say I accept the flat representation. So that's the accept header into HTTP request. So with these mechanics, a given resource can serve a variation of media types, a variation of representation of the same resource. And when you make a query to that endpoint, you can say which representation you would like to get. And you can actually even have different list here of media types, so that if the endpoint cannot honor the first one, then it's going to default on the second one. So now we have an endpoint that's expressing some JSON, and it's actually having a media type to qualify the JSON. But still the media type helps, that's for sure, but the JSON is still JSON, and if you want to understand it, you need to understand the media type. Means probably you need to go to some documentation that describes the media type and what's expected inside that JSON. So it would be nice if the JSON was in itself more self-descriptive, and this is why actually the JSON used in LTI services are actually not just plain JSON, but they are JSON enriched with a linked data semantic layer, and for that we use JSON-LD. And the nice thing about JSON-LD actually is that it's still plain JSON, so really most of the time when you have a JSON payload, making it JSON-LD is just adding an add context around it to say, okay, these things that you have in this JSON actually are mapping to those ontologies. Ontologies, you know, is a big name for just saying a set of common and shared definition. So best maybe is to go look at an example of that in the actual JSON-LD website. So if we go here, and we see we have a simple example of a JSON-LD. So let's just take it, copy it, and let's go to the playground, paste it in there. So we see we have name, born, spouse. Okay, so what does name means, what does born means, you know, and all of that is actually defined into now an ontology about persons that is actually shared. So the idea here is that not only you have ontologies, but you expect different kind of documents to try to use the same ontologies. And you'll see on the IMS website that it defines ontologies, and those ontologies are supposed to be reused across services. So then if a service exposes outcomes, and if two services expose outcomes, they use the same JSON-LD to describe those outcomes. So going back here to the example, so this is a very compact format, something very typical. Again, if you just care about the JSON portion of it, this is kind of just, you can just easily ignore it. But now you can expand it. So when you expand it, it's gonna use a context to say, oh, actually name that we see here, the name is actually, that's actually this is a definition of name. And you see this is a full expanded definition, and we can go and have a look at it and say what is the name, and we go and have a look, and we can find the vocabulary here and find the name somewhere. One last thing about JSON-LD is the importance of linked data. So what is meant by that is that whenever you refer to an entity or resource, you try to avoid just plain or opaque IDs, but you try to give an ID that's actually a locator where you can go and get information, access that resource. So you see here, for example, spouse is not just you know, just a name. It's actually something here in this example you could use to actually dereference. So there are great videos on JSON-LD on YouTube, and I encourage you to have a look at those. So let's use the tool settings service, because it's a simple service, as an illustration of some of those principles. So tool settings is a service that was introduced with the LTI 2.0 specification. So it's related to custom parameters. Custom parameters actually were either you had to enter them manually in the system, or you had to use a content item selection request flow, which is a new flow actually. So in most cases, the older interaction still prevails, where you launch, and actually the only thing that differentiates this link from another is just that this has a different link ID. So now here you launch new link ID. The tool provider is going to ask you, okay, this is a new link. What do you want to bind it to? And it says you're going to bind it to an assignment. Let's have some identifier for the assignment. But now reverse and associating this link ID to this assignment, and with the issues we've seen before, is that this information remains purely into the tool provider space, and therefore on the tool consumer, when the course is copied or archived, this information is lost and you need to rebind on first launch. Now here you're going to get injected a link setting container URL. So now what does it do? So in this link setting container is basically the container of all the custom parameters for this link. You could see it that way. So now here I've launched and I'm doing the binding, and when I've done the binding, then this is going to call onto this container and post a new and put a new value for it. This value is going to be a new parameter basically, and so it's gonna, for example, gonna say it's assignment ID, and you're gonna say 127. And now, whenever this link is launched, it's going to contain this custom parameter. It's going to contain custom underscore AGN underscore ID 127. You're able to execute the link. But the good thing about it now is that when this link is duplicated here, this information will be duplicated too, because now it resides on the tool consumer side. And the same thing when the command cartridge is exported, and this information is in there. So that's the link setting. So you have settings at the link level. But you can also have settings at the tool level itself, as a system for your tool. So basically, anytime your tool launch any link, you can specify parameters. And to do that, then you have another container, which are the tool system level container. And you would get that URL too if you ask for it. And actually, there is an in-between value, which is a tool, that tool for the current context, for the current course. And there also you can put some parameters that any links executed within that context will also contain that parameter. So, and for that then you will have a third container, which is a tool context container URL. So let's look at the specification. So you see here 3 containers, 3 URLs that you don't have prior knowledge of, but are injected in your link. And actually they're injected in your link through substitution parameters. So we can have a look at the specification. We go to the tool settings container service, and you see here that you can get the settings or put a new value for the settings. And so here we find the 3 levels of custom parameters to get the URL. So you have the link level settings, the course level, and the system level one. So those ones are injected on every launch, and you get to pick where you want to do your changes. And now here we also have media types, and you see we have a complex, not really complex, but we have a regular one and a simple one. So what's the difference? The regular one is a representation where you find all the parameters for the link, but grouped by the level. So you say for this link, you're going to have a link level parameters, which are those ones. Then you're going to also find parameters at the course level and system level. But you see they separated each one in their containers, indicate the scope. This is course, this is system, and this is link. But sometimes you just want to get all the parameters that apply to a link, and you don't really care where those are coming from. So in this case, you're going to say that you require the simple representation. In this case, in the simple representation, you get just a list of key value pairs of all the custom parameters, and those you cannot know if they're coming from a tools level setup or just at the link. But you can guess here that chapter is probably a link level setting, and a nice band is probably a course level setting. And back on the more complex one, you see the more complex one is also using JSON-LD context, and is using a JSON-LD construct here. And you could dereference that to get more information on those attributes. So the next service is outcome management. So we've seen that with basic outcome, you can actually report a single grade into the host gradebook. And that's fine if what you're linking here is something like a test. But what if the link is actually to a more complex resource, like for example an ebook. In an ebook, you might have multiple tests. Test 1, test 2, test 3. So now you have one link here. And this link now has multiple activities. The scheme of actually having a single result would require you to compute on the ebook side the final grade for the ebook, which might be something you might want to do, but actually you might also want to expose those assignments back there directly into the host gradebook. Another approach to that is that you might have multiple links to your ebook. And when you're linking from this link, you might actually take this test here. So it becomes harder to know that a given link is associated to a given result. So that's the kind of issue that outcome management is trying to address by giving deeper access to the tool provider on the host gradebook. One thing it cannot do, though, is give access to the full gradebook, because there are many privacy issues, obviously, and so what we want is that the tool provider can only see and manipulate a filtered view of the gradebook that it owns. So that's basically we have a sandboxed view of the gradebook. And how does the sandbox work? You remember every tool provider has a key identifying the tool consumer. So basically now the key that is passed on every service request is used to filter what this tool provider can see. So now a little bit of terminology. So how do we call traditionally what we see as a column in a gradebook is called a line item. And a line item has a label as points possible. Now a line item is going to contain result. And those results we've seen before. Now results can be point based. And also they have a status. And what is the status? Is that if the activity is started, completed, finalized. So basically it allows the tool provider to give a little bit more information on the host gradebook about where the student stands against a given activity. So now you can have 4 kinds of URLs that can be passed to you. The line item URL. So the line items URL is actually basically the gradebook container. It lets you access to all the line items that belongs to your tool provider, and it lets you also create new line items and delete ones. So then you have a given line item. If there is a line item associated with this link, pass it directly to me on lunch. And the same way, you can also ask for result URL. And this is relying on the capability to auto-create a result on first lunch for a given user, which is a similar behavior to what we've seen with basic outcome, which means that when you launch a single activity which is associated to a line item, a user, you're going to create a result URL to get the result back. And finally, you have the results URL, which is a container of all the results for a given line item. So if you want in terms of hierarchy, it could be something like that. You have the line item, line items, which is a container, has line item. A line item has a results, has a set of results, a results container, which contains a bunch of results. So that's the rich outcome. And with rich outcome now, you can really have much richer integration with the gradebook, adding column, removing column, setting grades, querying for all the grades and stuff like that. And still again, all of limited to your own data. You cannot see someone else's data. So we can have a look at the specification. You see here they are still in public draft at the time of this recording. So we see here that in terms of representation, we have the line item container. Then we have a single line item, and you see we have the line item and we have the line item results. So those are the same representation, but the line item is just going to contain a reference to the result container, for which you might, if you want, get access to all the results. And that's useful if you want to get some information just about the line item. But if you want to get information with the line item, including in one single request all the results, then you ask for representation that contains the results embedded into the line item. So the result container is just all the results for a single line item, and then the result itself. And those are the two kinds of services. And we can see here, the capabilities. Line items URL, line item URL, and we would see the same one for results. So that's the rich outcome. And it's going to be very useful when your tool provider is a more complex experience than just a single activity. So next, actually, the newest LTI service is the membership services. So what is it about? Well, for that, we need to understand how the roster information is actually propagated in typical LTI. So here as a tool provider, I only know a user exists when a user launches. So as this user launch, then I see a new user and I can add it to my roster. And when another user comes around, then I discover that user and I can add it. If this user here actually is removed from the course, I have no idea that that's happening. I'm just never going to get a login from that user again. Well, that works fine for many activities, but sometimes some tool providers would need to get more information about the roster. For example, they would need to offer some kind of grouping functionality, and for that, the instructor will need to go upfront, get access to the roster in the tool provider without having to wait that each and every student actually performs at least one lunch. And so for that, the membership service, or kind of a roster service, lets the tool provider access the full roster of a course. So now when the instructor launches here, this will contain the membership endpoint, and it can go and query here. So what this service is going to provide is going to give you all users information that you would get on a regular student lunch, but now you can get it up front. So that means, for example, that if in the tool provider you said that a link cannot get email, then this roster information will not contain the user's email also. So now here, in one go, you get the full roster. And we know, especially in this MOOC era, that the roster can be quite big. And so if you want to keep in sync, what we don't want to do is keep asking for the full roster and keeping it in sync. So in addition to getting the full roster will contain a delta, a difference link. And then you can always trigger that link to get only the changes that happen since you get the last roster. So basically what it would become is that you do a full roster for the first time as a tool provider. Then you use a delta link to keep your roster in sync. You might do a full roster from time to time to make sure you're okay, but that's how you would actually keep your roster up to date. And so we can have a quick look at the actual documentation. So we see here membership. We can look at the media type, and we see the media type will contain the user information, so user ID, source ID, email, family name. Again, you're gonna get here what you would get on the user launch anyway, but you can get it up front. And also we see here that it's a container, it's one of those IMS containers, so they all follow the same paradigm to be paginated. So you can get, so you don't get, if it's a big roster, you might get it in multiple pages. And here is the delta. Right now it's called differences. The name might change, but basically that link lets you get a list of updates compared to the last time you got information about the roster. And the tricky thing about updates is that how do you deal with a deletion, with member being removed? And this is why you have the status here now, because you can have a status of saying that a user has been removed, and that's how you would know a user has dropped from the roster. So we see here the status saying deleted. That's really useful, again, purely for the difference or the delta view, because when you get the full roster, those won't be listed. So back on the adoption map, I've added outcome management and membership service here. So they're still in draft, and so they're still a little bit far away. I think membership will get probably a bit sooner because it's a simpler spec, but it's a good time, because they're in public draft, it's a good time to review them, see if they meet your need, and propose any changes, or if you see any shortcomings with the proposals. I've also added here content name request and arrow towards adoption, because I think this one is also getting a lot of traction. And I've added CASA. So what is CASA? CASA is a way to discover LTI tool providers. It's a kind of, they call it an app store, but there's no e-commerce aspect to it that I know of. But it's more a way for, if you have your little app store that decides a bunch of tool providers and other resources that you set up in your institution, then you can have another store somewhere from another institution, and you can set up a sharing aspect. So now here, if you list an interesting resource, then you can set up rules that propagates from one store to another. That's really my understanding of CASA. So that's being sponsored by UCLA. It's an interesting one to propagate tool providers and other resources from one institution to another, and possibly here you could also have a publisher. And finally, another one I have added here that I haven't talked much in this presentation is Common Cartridge. So Common Cartridge has been along for a very long time. It's a way to package a course, and this means web resources in a course, quizzes and stuff like that. And it also gives a structure to your resources. You're following a tree representation. So one thing you can put in a Common Cartridge, obviously, is an LTI link. And that's becoming very useful in a way to share a set of links pre-configured inside a Common Cartridge. So now you can use a Common Cartridge to come around, and this Common Cartridge will contain the set of links with the custom parameters required for the link to function. And then you can just import the Common Cartridge, and the links are going to appear in their own folder in your course. So you could have, like, for example, week 1, and then it would have an LTI link to some resource like an assessment, and then an LTI link to a reading activity. All of those are still externally, but pre-configured with the right parameters right away. And to even simplify that, because LTI is just XML and the structure is also in the manifest XML of the Common Cartridge, there is something called the fin Common Cartridge. And so the fin Common Cartridge, because the Common Cartridge, because it needs to embed all the resources, is a zip file. But the fin Common Cartridge is just a manifest, which is an XML document. And the XML document embeds the structure, but also all the LTI links description. So now you don't have to import a zip file, you just have to import an XML and get a bunch of containers with the links pre-configured. So that's the fin cartridge. So that closes the a view of the LTI and LTI related specification. So one thing I haven't talked just yet is the C, the Caliper. So I will finish the presentation with that. With Caliper, we go back to the idea of a black box. Caliper lets you now send atomic interaction events back into the tool consumer. So on the tool consumer side, now you can have a new service, which is the Caliper event store. And basically here I represent it as distinct entities. So that's the event store. And the event store is going to receive events now from the tool provider. So on launch, one way to get this to work out is that on launch you can pass the endpoint for the Caliper store, Caliper event store. And here this is going to send it back atomic learning events. So what's a learning event? Learning event is a simple bit of interaction. So for example, opening a chapter, taking a test, submitting a test, those kind of thing. And for the tool provider to be able to send those events, the first thing it needs to do is to have some kind of endpoint. And the IMS is going to provide API, actually, what's called a sensor API, for the main languages that's going to help you basically connect with an event store to push those events. And push those events in the right format. So what is the format? So Caliper defines a grammar. It's following a typical triple format where you have a subject, a verb, and an object. So here the subject is a learning context. So what can be a learning context? For example, a learning context can be a student inside a course using a given tool. So that's a learning context. Who is doing the action? And then you have the action itself, like open a book, something like that. Then you have the learning activity. So which book is being opened, which chapter, for example. So that's a typical triple. And what's really important with Caliper is not just that it defines a grammar, but most importantly, it defines a vocabulary. It's going to define what is called matrix profiles. They're going to normalize the description of the most common type of events and the most common type of interaction you find into the learning landscape. So, for example, reading interactions, so opening a reader, or taking a test, or consuming media, or going onto discussion forums. And so, by standardizing on the vocabulary, it's easier to aggregate those events because you can have 2 or 3 kinds of readers, different kind of assignment providers, different kind of media, different kind of forums, but they produce the same events. And so it's easier to aggregate and then derive sense out of it. What I show here is the tool provider reporting back to a tool consumer. But as we know, the learning landscape is getting more and more heterogeneous. And you can use your mobile, you can have different devices, you can have multiple tool providers, even multiple tool consumers inside an institution. And at the end, everybody is the black box of someone else. And this is why here, by standardizing on the vocabulary, you can actually gather the information from multiple black boxes and try to get a unified meaning out of those. And so here we see here multiple of those boxes. And for example, one could be a tool consumer here, another could be a tool consumer, and this can be a mobile reader. Well, anyway, many different things. And so the way they propagate to the two consumers, it can be a star model where everybody's get a sensor API and they communicate directly to the event store. So that could be kind of a star model, but it's because the issue is how do you grant the right to publish to the event store and propagate that information down. And more of a ring approach often could also work where, for example, here you can have a tool consumer, and here are all the tool providers, and they communicate directly to this one then relay to the event store, and then this one is also a tool provider, but is also communicating with its own thing. So it relays here, and through the trust established between those two partners, and then communicate back here, which goes to the event store. So the topology might differ, but at the end, the idea here is that in the event store, you aggregate a bunch of events that are following the same format and the same meanings. And so it becomes easier to derive a sense and meaning and then use this data. Because Caliper is only about how to get the data in a standard format in a single place. But what you make out of it, what kind of meaning, how you use it is another story. Well, if you're still around after an hour, that means you're really interested in that stuff. So thank you first for watching this, and I'm going to give you a few extra pointers. The first one, of course, is the IMS Global website, and there they have an LTI developer section, so you can go there and find resources, sample of codes and stuff like that. Then you might also attend one of the IMS quarterly meetings where they have an LTI bootcamp, so it's a full day dedicated to LTIs. So that's something that you might find interesting too. We're also going to point out to the Tsugi framework. It's a PHP framework, and that's really taking all of the LTI plumbing out of you to help you do an LTI provider, but purely on focusing on the actual functionality you want to offer, and it's taking care of the LTI aspect for you. So that's something to look at, and you can always email me if you have questions. I can give that a shot, and I will also give my Twitter handle. Okay, so thank you for watching. See you around. Bye.